This is about behaviorist John B. Watson. John B. Watson was born January 9, 1878 in Travelers Rest, South Carolina, and died in New York on September 25, 1958. Watson's first marriage was to Mary Ikes. They had 2 children, ultimately ending in divorce. Watson's second marriage was to Rosalie Rayner. They had 2 children before her untimely death. Education. Watson attended Greensville Furman University at the age of 16, obtaining a master's degree at age 21. Then went to the University of Chicago to further his psychology degree. Watson began studying philosophy under John Dewey on the recommendation of Furman professor Gordon Moore. The combined influences of Dewey, James Rowland Angell, Henry Herbert Donaldson, and Jacques Loeb led Watson to develop a highly descriptive, objective approach to the analysis of behavior, an approach he would later call behaviorism. Wanting to make psychology more scientifically acceptable, Watson thought of the approach as a declaration of faith, based on the idea that a mythologically could transfer psychology into a scientific discipline. Later, Watson became interested in the work of Ivan Pavlov and eventually included a highly specified version of Pavlov's principles in his popular work. Behaviorism. In 1913, Watson published the article Psychology as the Behaviorist Views It, also called the Behaviorism Manifesto. In the manifesto, Watson outlined the major features of his new philosophy of psychology, behaviorism, with the first paragraph of the article concisely describing Watson's behaviorist position. Psychology at the behaviorist views is a purely objective experimental branch of natural science. Its theological goal is the prediction of the control of behavior. Sorry, charge my battery. Introspection forms of the essential part of this method, nor is the scientific value of its data dependent upon the readiness with which they led themselves to interpretation in terms of coincidence. The behaviorist, in his efforts to get an unitary scheme of animal response, recognizes no dividing line between man or brute. The behavior of man, with all of its refined and complexity, forms only a part of the behaviorist's total scheme of investigation. Language. Watson referred to language as a manipulative habit because when we speak language, the sound originates in our larynx, which is the body instrument that we manipulate every time we talk in order to hear our voice. As we change our throat shape and tongue position, different sounds are made. Watson explains that when a baby first cries or first says da or ma, that is learning language. To further his theory, Watson and his wife conducted an experiment in which they conditioned a baby to say da da when he wanted his bottle. Although the baby was conditioned and was a success for a short while, the conditioning was eventually lost. Watson argues, however, that as the child got older, he would imitate Watson as a result of Watson's imitating him. By 3 years old, the child needed no help developing his vocabulary because he was learning from others. Thus, language is imitative. Speech. Watson goes on to claim words are but substitutes for objects and situations. In his earlier baby experiment, the baby learned to say da when he wanted a bottle, or mama when he wanted his mom, or shoe da when he pointed to his father's shoe. Watson then argued that we watch our chances and build upon these, meaning human babies have to form their language by applying sound they have already formed. Thus, Watson said it is why babies point to an object but call it a different word. Lastly, Watson explains how a child learns to read words. A mom points at each word and reads it in a patterned manner, and eventually, because the child recognizes the word with the sound, he or she learns to read it back. Memory. This, according to Watson, is the start of memory. All of the ideas previously mentioned are what Watson says make up our memory, and that we carry the memory we develop throughout our lives. Watson tells the tale of Mr. Addison Sims and his friend in order to illustrate this idea. A friend of Mr. Sims sees Mr. Sims on the street sidewalk and exclaims, "Upon my life, Addison Sims of Seattle, I haven't seen you since World Fair in Chicago. Do you remember the gay parties we used to have in the old Windermere Hotel?" Even after all this, Mr. Sims cannot remember the man's name, although they were old friends who used to encounter many of the same people, places, and experiences together. Watson argues that if the two men were to do some of their old shared activities and go to some of the old same places, the stimuli, then the response or memory would occur. Study of emotion. Fear. Watson was interested in conditioning of emotion. Of course, behaviorism putting an emphasis on people's external behaviors, emotions were considered as merely physical responses. Watson thought that at birth there are 3 unlearned emotion reactions. Fear. Oops. Let's go back. Can we go back? No, I need to go back. Sorry about that. Fear invoked by only two stimuli that are unconditioned, a sudden noise or the loss of a physical support. However, because older children are afraid of many things, different animals, strange people, etc., it must be that such fear-provoking stimuli are learned. Fear can be observed by following reactions with infants: crying, rapid breathing, eye closing, or sudden jumping. Rage. Rage, an innate response to the body's movement of the child's being constricted. If a very young child is held in a way that she cannot move at all, then she will begin to scream and stiffen her body. Later, this reaction is applied to different situations. For example, children get angry when they are forced to take a bath or clean their room. These situations provoke rage because they are associated with physical restraint. Love. Love, an automatic response for infants when tickled, patted, or stroked lightly. The infant responds with smiles, laughs, and other affectionate responses. According to Watson, infants do not love specific people. They are only conditioned to do so because the mother's face is progressively associated with the patting and stroking. It's become the combination stimuli exceeding the affection towards her. Affectionate feelings for people later generate the same response because they are somehow associated with a mother. Little Albert Experiment, 1920. The goal of the experiment was to show how principles of and at the time recently discovered classical conditioning could be applied to condition fear of a white rat into little Albert, a 9-month-old boy. Watson and Rayner conditioned little Albert by clanging an iron rod when a white rat was presented. First, they presented the boy a white rat and observed that he was not afraid of it. Second, they presented him with a white rabbit and then clanged an iron rod. Little Albert responded by crying. The second presentation was repeated several times. Finally, Watson and Rayner presented the white rat by itself, and the boy showed fear. Later, in an attempt to see if the fear transferred to other objects, Watson presented Albert with a rabbit, a dog, and a fur coat. He cried at the sight of all of them. This study demonstrates how emotion can become conditioned response. As the story of little Albert has made the rounds, inaccuracy and inconsistency have crept in, some of them even due to Watson himself. Analysis of Watson's films footage of Albert suggests that the infant was mentally and developmentally disabled. An ethical problem of the study is that Watson and Rayner did not uncondition little Albert. Deconditioning. Because little Albert was taken out of town, Watson did not have the time to decondition the child. The oblivious had This obviously had ethical implications, but Watson did put in place a method for deconditioning fears. He worked with a colleague, Mary Clover Jones, on the set of the procedures aimed at imitating the fears of another little boy. A little boy named Peter. Peter seemed to fear white rats, and rabbits. Watson and Jones put Peter in his high chair and gave him a nice afternoon snack. At the same time, a white rabbit in the cage was put in a distance that did not seem to disturb the child. The next day, the rabbit was put slightly closer until rabbit showed signs of slight disturbance. This treatment was repeated day after day until Peter could serenely eat his snack with the rabbit being right next to him. Peter was even able to play with the rabbit afterwards. This form of behavior modification is a technique today called somatic desensitization. Psychology care of infant and child, 1928. In 1928, Watson wrote the book Psychology Care of Infant and Child. In it, Watson explained that behaviors were starting to believe psychologists' care and analysis were required for infant and children. All of Watson's examination were due to his belief that children should be treated as young adults. As such, he warned against the inevitable danger of mother providing too much love and affection because love, along with everything else understood by the behavior's perception, Watson argues, and conditioned. He uses invalidism to support his warning, contending that since society is not overly comfort children as they become young adults in real world, parents should not set up this unrealistic expectation. Watson's slogans, nature versus nurture. Watson deemed that his slogan to be not more babies, but better brought up babies, in support of the nurture side of the nature versus nurture debate, claiming that the world would benefit from extinguishing pregnancies for 20 years while enough data was gathered to ensure an efficient child-rearing process. Further emphasizing nature, Watson argued that nothing is instinctual, but rather everything is built into a child through the interaction with their environment. Parents therefore holding complete responsibility as they chose what environment to allow their child to develop in. Child rearing. Though having researched many topics throughout career, child rearing became Watson's most prized interest. His book would be extremely popular, having sold 100,000 copies after just a few months of release. Many critics were surprised to see even his contemporaries come to accept his views. He emphasizes on child development started to become a new phenomenon and would influence some of his successors, though the field had already been divulged into by psychologists prior to Watson. G. Stanley Hall, for instance, became very well known for his 1904 book Adolescence. Hall believes differ from Watson's behaviorism, as the former believed that one's behavior is mostly shaped by hereditary and genetical predetermined factors, especially during childhood. His most famous concept, the storm and stress theory, normalizes adolescents' tendencies to act out with conflicting mood swings. 12 infants. Watson said, "Give me a dozen healthy infants, well-formed, and my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to take anyone at random and train him to become any type of specialist I might select.